So we're going to take a look at the forensic accountant's conclusions now based on the evidence that they have been able to review, but obviously their investigation has been hampered by the missing Horizon transaction data that we went through in the previous video. But despite this, the conclusions seem to suggest that at best there was shaky evidence to bring this case, and I guess at worst no case to answer at all in terms of either identifying a perpetrator, identifying a victim, or even identifying that the crime had in fact taken place. Let's jump straight into the inquiry.
And if we could go to page 59 of this document, please. It's paragraph 5.25 that we're looking for, please. This paragraph addresses the continuation of discrepancies after Mr. McLaughlin had left the branch, and the authors say this: the data provided in relation to the support centre calls, see paragraph 2.1, 5.21 above, and the cash differences after Mr. McLaughlin's departure would indicate that there were continuing difficulties experienced regarding the reconciliation of cash balances at Brookfield Post Office.
And that would seem to suggest that, if you think there is one person stealing, well, now your case almost has to become, well, after he's departed, there's got to be multiple people involved in this, or he's lying about his departure, which would seem easily proven or disproven. If we look at the weekly cash accounts and what they say about that above, a weekly cash and stock count is performed in totals input into the Horizon system. As we know, that was a standard practice. The Wednesday, the 6 to 7 period was, a peak period for issues because Wednesday was the weekly cash balancing day. A cash reconciliation is printed, Appendix D, from the Horizon system comparing the theoretical closing cash balance using last week's balance carried forward and all cash input and output transactions and the actual cash balance counted. So the subpostmaster enters the actual cash that they've taken that week, and Horizon does its own calculations using the previous week's figures and all the transactions that have gone through, and they should always match. Any discrepancies between theoretical cash held and actual cash held are noted in the discrepancies table on the front page of the cash account. Attached at Appendix M is a summary of the weekly cash account discrepancies between 29th of March 2001 and 7th of February 2002. So, a little less than a year. As can be viewed, the largest discrepancy noted while Mr. McLaughlin was working in Brookfield Post Office was a shortage of £70.43 on the weekend in 5th of July 2001. After Mr. McLaughlin's employment was terminated by the Post Office, discrepancies over £100 were noted regularly. So if you're accusing someone of stealing and then they step back from involvement in that post office, you would expect the shortfalls to totally disappear. However, it seems that not only did they not disappear, they actually increased after that. Again, that would suggest that, it's worthy of investigating other routes and other potential answers to where the money is going. 5.24, a further anomaly is in the fact that after Mr. McLaughlin left the post office, both surplus discrepancies and shortage discrepancies can be noted in the majority of the weekly cash accounts, as in this wasn't a one-off. It wasn't something that he was doing, clearly, because it carried on week after week after week after week after week after week. I mean, and standard human behaviour would kind of dictate, wouldn't it, that if you were being accused of stealing money from the accounts and the accounts were showing discrepancies, normally what would happen at this point is that person would stop taking that money if they were indeed guilty of taking the money, and the accounts would start balancing, because it would be foolish to continue doing that after you've already apparently been caught red-handed. But obviously that hasn't happened in these cases. This is in contrast to the period prior to Mr. McLaughlin's departure, when the trend was either a surplus or a shortage to occur, but not both. Interesting. So again, how can you have a surplus and a shortage at the same time? That would indicate a bug, because you can't both be up and down on a till or on money taken.
Did you ever consider, when you were investigating Mr. McLaughlin's case, investigating whether any problems being experienced by Mr. McLaughlin continued after he stopped working in the branch in July 2001?
Yes.
And did you do that?
I would have spoken with the retail line manager who would have been responsible for the office.
And what would you have asked that retail line manager?
I would have asked how the person was getting on, because I knew that the person that had gone in had been working in the office and had had previous post office experience. And to usually, because the contracts manager and the retail line manager would have been in my office a couple of times every week, I would have asked them, well, is this business going okay? Are there any problems? And I would say that would have been the only inquiry I would have made.
So looking for reasons that they might potentially be stealing from it, which is fair enough, but also surely you should be asking about reasons they might not have done. What's the background? Is anything like this happening in your area with other sub-postmasters?
You say would have. Can you remember actually doing that in this case?
No, I'm sorry. It's just too long ago.
The conclusions of the report are set out at section 6. That's on page 61, please. And the conclusions of the report are these. The Horizon system operating within the post office is designed to manage and track cash transactions passing through the post office. Comparison of a theoretical cash balance with an actual cash balance on a weekly basis identifies any discrepancies arising as a result of cash being over or understated, brackets, cash surpluses or deficits. The theoretical cash balance is calculated by taking the previous week's opening balances, adding receipts and deducting payments to calculate a closing cash balance. As with any system, the accuracy and integrity of the information is impacted upon by a number of differing but interdependent factors. 1, the integrity of the computer software itself. 2, the controls surrounding the system. 3, the controls surrounding data input. 4, the accuracy of data input. And 5, the training and quality of staff operating the system. From our review work in relation to the Horizon system operating in Brookfield Post Office, we would conclude that there were clearly ongoing difficulties regarding the reconciliation of cash balances at the post office. This is evidenced as follows. 1, the discrepancies identified as a result of the current investigation. 2, ongoing cash surpluses and deficits which occurred not only during the period of Mr. McLaughlin's employment, but which continued after his departure. Indeed, the magnitude of reported differences increased after his departure in or around July 2001. 3, a high number of calls to the helpline, many of which related to difficulties regarding the cash reconciliations on the system. And going down, please. Sorry, if we could scroll up a little, please. We've just lost 4. The evidence produced from the investigation has identified that for a significant number of cash payments made during the period December 2000 to July 2001, that supporting pension or allowance vouchers are not available. The absence of such vouchers could be explained by any of the following, or a combination of these. That an individual transaction is valid, but that the supporting voucher has been lost. Or 2, that the transaction has been keyed in error and that cash was not in fact paid out. Or 3, that the transaction has been deliberately created to reduce weekly cash discrepancies, but that cash was not in fact paid out. Or 4, that the transaction had been deliberately created and that cash has also been taken.
So with that, 2 of those, the reasons for describing the absence of such vouchers would be deliberate attempts to manipulate the transactions. 2 would actually be accidents or, errors, as opposed to evidence of a crime. So again, it's why the data is so critical to proving one way or the other.
And if we can just scroll down to the end of the report. Our review has been restricted by the fact that the transaction logs which detail all entries to the system are not available. These logs record transactions but also record user IDs, which show who has keyed each entry. The usefulness of these reports is reduced significantly by the fact that individual vouchers cannot be traced through to individual entries on the log, and therefore cannot be traced to individual user IDs. However, we cannot comment further on whether a review of the full available logs may have assisted our investigation in identifying recurring patterns in relation to the entries identified. The charges brought against Mr. McLaughlin are stated in the following terms: that you dishonestly, with a view to you, for yourself or another, or with the intent to cause loss to another, falsified a document required for an accounting purpose. The inference, therefore, is that the transactions which are not supported by vouchers have been deliberately created by Mr. McLaughlin to cover up cash taken by him or another person. Our review has identified the following weaknesses in supporting this assertion. The differences identified by the review include transactions which have resulted in cash payments being made both over and understated. The logic of why an individual would create fictitious entries which would require him to lodge money into the system is not apparent. Such differences are more consistent with keying errors or system errors rather than the theft. 2, for the entries identified and included in the claim, there is no direct evidence to trace these entries to Mr. McLaughlin, although clearly the subpostmaster, he had ultimate responsibility for the operations of the system. 3, furthermore, based on the restricted logs available for a number of the transactions claimed in the loss, it would appear that Mr. McLaughlin made none of the relevant entries for the relevant days. 4, differences continued and indeed increased after Mr. McLaughlin's departure from the post office. This would suggest that issues surrounding the cash discrepancies were not directly related to his involvement, at least fully so.
So that would appear to blow a hole right in the case, because number one, it's weird if you are trying to steal money, why you would actually create transactions that actually mean that you have to make up money in the system. It's like you're stealing from yourself at that point, although there is an admittance that there are transactions going the other way as well, allegedly. So there's no direct evidence to trace the entries to Mr. McLaughlin. So one of the key things, not only do you've got to prove that a crime has taken place, but prove that you've actually got the right person for it, and that hasn't been established as far as the forensic accountants are concerned. On the evidence that is available, it's that it doesn't actually link directly to Mr. McLaughlin either. Although obviously they do state, if he's got control of the post office, even if he's not working there, there could potentially be some involvement, but they haven't actually found some evidence of that. So there seems to be several key weaknesses in this case, which would presumably be enough to actually say, at least second guess why you're taking the case, seek more evidence, because at the moment it's baffling how with such assertions and conclusions based on the evidence available, that you can actually prove a case beyond reasonable doubt.
So, looking at those conclusions in the report, the reliability of Horizon was being raised in this report, wasn't it?
It was.
So that's now two separate sources, the forensic accountants and the accused, both raising issues with Horizon. So surely it's got to become a Horizon case, as they call it, even if they didn't think it was at the outset.